Hello my friends, and welcome back to the Review Den. I've been pouring through some of the PlayStation's original launch catalog, getting a few ideas for the future, and I got to playing Wipeout. Now, I never really played much of the original Wipeout back when it launched. I only had a demo disc and I think Battle Arena to Shinden, but going back and playing through it now, I can see what a marvel this game must have been at the time. Wipeout was not only a fast and challenging racer, it was an audio-visual tour de force, especially for the earliest days of the PlayStation. It stunned players and reviewers alike who were getting their very first taste of the 32-bit era, and now, all these years later, I'm going to attempt to do this title justice. Join me as we look at all the ports, all the content, see a fun pop culture appearance of the prototype, and learn how Mario Kart and electronic trance music played a part in the creation of this iconic game. First impressions are always critical, but for Sony, the pressure must have been amped up to 11. They weren't introducing the next iteration of an established console, they were introducing an entirely new platform and gaming label to a landscape dominated by Nintendo and Sega. If they didn't deliver out of the gate, they would likely get lost in the pack, and brand loyalty to the established players would do the rest. Thankfully though, the console launched with a killer lineup of exclusive titles that not only helped establish the tone of the PlayStation brand,
You are not ready.
but showed off its leading-edge hardware, and one company to contribute to that lineup was British developer Psygnosis. It was the early 90s, and Psygnosis had been at the forefront of some of the more technologically and visually impressive titles of the time. They were responsible for some of the Amiga's most standout games, and since their advanced technology group was now experimenting with CD-ROM technology, they were seen as a perfect fit for Sony's shiny new system. Sony purchased Psygnosis in the lead-up to their hardware launch, but the idea for Wipeout itself came from visual artist Jim Bowers and designer Nick Burcombe. Jim Bowers had the idea of a combat-focused anti-gravity racer, while Nick Burcombe proposed setting the entire game to British rave music. More on that later. Their chance to share their proposal came when Sony Pictures asked Psygnosis to create a gameplay montage for their upcoming film Hackers. Man, talk about the perfect opportunity to pitch your idea. The team got to work creating the pair's vision, and what you see in the Cyberdelia Club is the actual proof of concept gameplay for Wipeout. This isn't a pre-rendered CG movie, this is the actual Wipeout concept gameplay, though obviously the actors aren't playing. Say whatever you want about the movie, but it is awesome to have an iconic game, or its concept, immortalized in a cult 90s Hollywood film. The environmental combat and interaction was obviously ditched for more straight-up racer-on-racer action, but you can easily see the game shining through even in this early form. Sony loved what they saw, asked Psygnosis to build the complete game for their launch lineup, and the result, well, is right here. Wipeout is a futuristic anti-gravity, or AG, racing game with an emphasis on track memorization, practice, and a small side of combat. The good news, especially for a launch title, is it's incredibly easy to pick up and play. You steer with the D-pad, one button is go, the other fires weapons, and once you get comfortable with the basics, there's a set of air brakes to help rotate the ship faster. And yes, the emphasis is on air brakes. You aren't connected to the ground here, these are all hovercraft, so the player needs to learn to steer a bit early, as your craft, especially in the original trilogy, or quadrilogy, has a lot of momentum when changing direction. This isn't terribly noticeable at first, but once you reach the later tracks, and especially the faster Rapier level, essentially the hard level, you'll need to learn to turn early to avoid crashing. You also have a limited amount of pitch control to adjust your jumps and landings. The tracks are layered with boost pads to give you a sudden burst of speed, and because this is combat racing, there are weapon pads as well, just like Mario Kart. Man, Mario Kart has so much to answer for, to give you an edge over your opponent. Rocket is an unguided shot, but if it hits, it pretty much brings its targets to a halt. Missile features homing ability, but only slows the target rather than completely smashing them. Shockwave is a homing weapon that destabilizes the target, making steering difficult. Mines drops a string of mines to slow down pursuers. Shield protects you from incoming attacks, and Turbo is a user-activated speed boost, though this is way more powerful than normal boost pads and can easily get you into trouble if you're not careful. Now just beware, the AI can and will use all of these against you. In fact, one of the iconic parts of Wipeout's sound design is hearing the computer call out incoming attacks. It sounds cool and helps you prepare for what's coming. No conversation about Wipeout is complete without mentioning the awesome graphics. This isn't just cutting-edge 3D in a world of 3D gaming. This was first of its kind outside the arcades. Until now, the Super Nintendo and Genesis or Mega Drive had been the mainstream, and rather than some slow, clunky transition between 2D and 3D, Sony came crashing out of the 32-bit gate with colorful, fast, and polished 3D visuals. It was a revolution in graphics, and Sony was leading the charge as if it had been doing so for years. Wipeout features sleek, swooping track designs all running at a mostly smooth 30 frames per second, all with a surprisingly decent draw distance for a first-gen game. Early PS1 titles could be a little short-sighted, and the N64's visual fog was the stuff of legends, but Wipeout let you see a good ways ahead. If there's one complaint, it's that some of the more complex track areas can be a little rough, as if the developers had some really cool ideas but didn't have enough polygons to cover the cost. But overall, this is a surprisingly slick-looking game, even now. All of this was boosted by a unique visual style courtesy of British art house Designers Republic. The Sheffield studio was known for its futuristic, anime-inspired, maxi-minimalist art style, and their work had been featured in ad campaigns for Adidas, Coca-Cola, MTV, as well as countless CD labels and music collaborations. Their consultancy here resulted in the fonts, logos, advertisements, and overall aesthetics that have defined Wipeout through the years. Psygnosis was always great with graphics, but bringing in Designers Republic was a stroke of genius. It paid off in dividends. One look and you can tell it's Wipeout. That's brand recognition you can't beat. And Wipeout is equally famous for its amazing soundtrack. Here too, the studio looked to some awesome inspiration. Wipeout features an amazing soundtrack by video game music composer Tim Wright under his Cold Storage label, but it took heavy influence from underground British trance and electronica groups of the day. And that stylistic choice wasn't without reason. When Nick Burcombe and Jim Bowers were bouncing ideas off each other in their local pub, seriously, this game is everything British, Burcombe mentioned how blasting some electronica helped him beat a particularly tough SNES racing session. As I'm sure we can all guess, he had been playing through F-Zero. No, Mario Kart. He had been playing through Mario Kart. Of course it was Mario Kart. He had been struggling with the 150cc championship, and the in-game music was starting to stress him out, so he hit mute on the TV, put on some Age of Love, and everything just clicked. The flow, the trance-like concentration, it fit perfectly. He brought his ideas and inspiration to Jim Bowers, and the rest is, well, history. Put all of this together and you have an awesome racing game. There's a tasty 6-track campaign to work your way through. You need to make 3rd place or better to progress to the next track, and finishing the season in 1st unlocks the Rapier or Hard level. Rapier features the same 6-race season, but the speed is amped up to 11. Only true masters will snag a podium here, but if you do, you're rewarded with the secret off-planet course, the Martian track Firestar. Welcome to Mars! Complete the new 7-course championship, if you can, and get that player a crown. You've won the F3600 Racing Championship of 2052. Enjoy the final win credits. But it's not going to be easy. Yeah, this is where we need to talk about the game's difficulty. The early Wipeout game's challenge is as legendary as their soundtrack. That's not inherently a bad thing, but modern gamers just be prepared. There are plenty of blind corners and sudden switchbacks hidden behind hills or in tunnels, and all of this is compounded by just how narrow the tracks can get. Seriously, the weapons in combat are a distant second in challenge to clearing the tracks here. Any collisions result in a brutal speed loss, so the name of the game here is practice. Practice, 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 practice. The key is to essentially take each corner before you reach it. The original games take the whole anti-gravity thing pretty seriously, so you need to start your turns and stab the air brakes a split second earlier than you think you need to. And since there's no track map and you're traveling at several hundred kph, again, it all comes down to practice and memorization. Start the game, get as far as you can, build a little muscle memory, restart, and repeat. It's tough, but this may have been why the game had such staying power. If this was easy, it might have been seen as a pretty but shallow tech demo or a weekend rental, but Wipeout made you stay with it. This was a game that roommates or entire college dorms would stay up playing. New players were wowed by the amazing speed and audio visuals, while experienced players were cheered on as they tried getting past just one more track or one more podium. It was a great time in gaming. For my own review den pro tips, I say try to focus on the track, not the power-ups. The game really rewards a smooth racing line, and aiming for the bonus pads will take you outside that line more often than not. For me, it all came together around the third track, Terramax, where if I tried to snag every speed and weapon power-up, I'd wind up crashing. But if I fought my instincts and ignored them and just lined up each corner like I should, I'd get much better times. And for pro tip 2, avoid your opponents. Don't battle with them. Actually, this also helps to keep you from getting tangled up in big crashes. The enemy AI is surprisingly aggressive here. They'll block and smash you if you try to battle with them, so instead of trying to get that perfect missile shot, just give them a wide berth. If you wind up getting a good power-up, sure, go ahead and use it, but if hitting an opponent means they'll just crash themselves into you, play it smart and just go around. Now for content, Wipeout includes 6 tracks, each with an alternate skybox for Repair class, the unlockable track Firestar, and 4 racecraft. This may seem slight by today's standards, but coming off the SNES Genesis generation, this was absolutely respectable, and again, the difficulty was this game's staying power. I mean, Ridge Racer had just 2 tracks, and that game's a blast to play even now, so yeah, different times. Alright, let's start with the ships. Just like the original F-Zero, Wipeout features 4 unique handling craft, each with its own in-universe manufacturer and pilots. AG Systems is the closest thing to an all-rounder in the first Wipeout. It's both capable and forgiving, but still teaches you to use the air brakes in tight corners, or in Repair class. Its only weakness is top speed. It's fast enough to win easier races, but on tougher tracks you might have to settle for podiums and win on points. Think of Oricom as the pro-level all-rounder. Its steering is slower than AG Systems, but it has a great top speed. If you can manage the handling, it's capable of consistent wins, not just podiums, but it might be a bit too tough on Repair class. Team Kyrex is all about top speed, and nothing else. These ships are a blast if you want to blow away the competition on the first few tracks, but beyond that, you need to have serious skills. These are slow to turn, slow to recover, but fastest in the straights. And Team Fisar starts the trend of being the best handling team in the game, right here in the very first Wipeout. Fisar is a great choice to learn the game with, especially Repair class, but they're a bit slow for reliable wins, even if you manage a perfect race, so you might want to move up to AG Systems when you're able. And you'll be racing these craft in a linear 6-race season, later 7 if you can manage. All of Wipeout starts right here on Ultima. The first track is a great warm-up as it has forgiving corners and is relatively wide. Some fun climbing corners introduce you to the game's elevation changes, and a long descending backstretch is bracketed by some crazy jumps. You get your first taste of a real challenge in the final turn, exiting the tunnel. It's blind and sharp, so don't be afraid to mash both air brakes to slow down and take it smartly. Carbonis is where you need to learn to focus on the corners, not the power-ups. This course features some crazy rolling switchbacks after the hilltop left and after the Buddha statues. Try to thread the needle here. The extra speed of the Repair class can really destabilize you in the switchbacks, so be careful of grounding out. Terramax is where the game starts baiting you with the speed and weapons pads. If you ignore them and just watch the corners, it's easier than Carbonis, but the track does get very narrow in the tunnel and bridge. Focus on the turns, and this track is almost as fast and smooth as Ultima. Repair class races at night and turns the tunnel and bridge into a nightmare, so remember you can mash those brakes for a tick if you need. The bleak industrial landscape of Korodera begins the second, more difficult set of racetracks where memorization is more of an issue. You'll now have to deal with the developer's most sinister trick, sudden hairpins after blind hilltops. At least this track telegraphs these a bit better with track signage, and the nuke plant jump is one of the best in the game. Just don't go too high. The deserts of Aridos are up next, and these pull together all the blind corners and tight tunnels of before, while matching them with some truly roller coaster-like elevation changes. This course also features a pair of track splits forming a fun figure 8. If you start on the left, you'll have a good line entering the upcoming tunnel, although you can get by with either route, unlike Silverstream. This is the hardest track of the series, bar none. You'll face the tightest hairpin turns of Wipeout here, and more often than not, the speed pads will just send you into a wall, so play it safe. You'll need to bring together all your skills and memorization. Remember, you can practice any track in free race, and even then, landing a podium is tough. The one unbreakable rule here is always stay left. The track splits at several locations, but they are not equidistant. The left split is always faster, and it's necessary if you want to stand a chance. If you can manage to win the Rapier class, then say hello to the secret track Firestar. Firestar has some tight corners and track splits immediately after the starting line, which can throw you off balance, but overall this is easier than Silverstream. The middle section of the track has some fast, cool sections traveling in and out of giant airlocks, and tons of power-up pads, but watch your speed for the final tight turns. It's a shame Firestar is locked away. It's a pretty cool track, but there's always cheat codes if you're struggling. Alright, so Wipeout's a cool game with cool content, but where exactly can you play it? Well, Wipeout was primarily developed for the original Sony PlayStation, but its popularity meant it would receive other ports. Two are well known, but one has only recently been, I guess you could say, rediscovered, and it's pretty cool, so let's take a look. Up first, of course, is the 1995 PlayStation release. This is the first and arguably best version of Wipeout, a true revolution in 32-bit gaming. It looks and plays great, has a killer soundtrack, and runs at a mostly smooth 30 frames per second. It offers support for the PS1's external memory card to save your scores and progress, as well as the Namco Nijicon for analog support. The addition of analog throttle and steering is pretty cool as a gimmick, but having used one, I can comfortably say that the game simply becomes too fast to make effective use of it. So don't worry, D-pad users, you're pretty much playing the game in the best way possible. The PS1 version was later made available for download on the PS3, PSP, and PS Vita, as well as the Sony Ericsson Xperia phones through their PlayStation Store functionality. As a cool side note, the European version features an additional 3 songs by Orbital, The Chemical Brothers, and Left Field. Dropping 1 year later was the Sega Saturn version. Like most Saturn ports of PlayStation titles, Wipeout runs a bit slower here, has slightly lower resolution textures, and suffers from that irritating transparency mesh. Surprisingly though, it's only a minor downgrade. Some games, including the sequel, Wipeout 2097, are a massive disappointment on Sega's platform, but the original Wipeout is a close contender, and best of all, it plays great. Collisions in the PlayStation version are pretty nasty, scrubbing off tons of speed and allowing the AI to capitalize on your every mistake, but the Saturn's difficulty is noticeably more forgiving. Collisions don't cost as much speed, and opponents can be beaten in slower craft or after a mistake or two. The slower frame rate can be a bit clunky on Rapier class, but Saturn owners get a surprisingly good port here. The 3D analog controller isn't supported, again, that's not a big loss, and the additional 3 songs are replaced by tracks from Rob Lord and Mark Bandola, due to Sony licensing issues. The PC version, or rather the first PC version, launched in 1995, same as the PlayStation, believe it or not. This version supports joystick input, but offers nothing in terms of advanced graphics options. Resolution is locked to 320 by 200, and textures have a pretty grungy look to them, especially the skyboxes. Weapon effects also look pretty poor, although with the right hardware, the frame rate is nice and smooth. You won't find any additional music, but it does curiously have different ship liveries. Not sure if these were alternate designs or just something to stand out from the background better, but either way, that's pretty cool. Overall, it's not a looker, but the gameplay is definitely there. If you want a better looking version of the game though, check out the ATI Rage Edition. When 3D accelerators first hit the market, they would often come bundled with a few recent games, specifically tailored to that card's 3D APIs. MechWarrior 2, Tomb Raider, and Whiplash were all common pack-ins, and ATI's 3D Rage, or 3D Expression, featured a custom accelerated Wipeout. The gameplay and features are all here, but now with added texture filtering and the possibility of resolutions up to 640 by 480. Ironically, most computers of the time didn't have the horsepower to run this smoothly. The ATI Rage wasn't really the best card, but thanks to a custom 3D software wrapper, GL Rage, we can experience a pretty accurate conversion in Windows 10, and with the added benefit of modern performance and resolutions. There's some geometry warping and visual bugs, but considering someone took the time to convert an almost 30-year-old legacy API pack-in game to modern Direct 3D is super cool. Props all the way. However you play it, Wipeout is a landmark game. It wowed gamers experiencing their first taste of 32-bit consoles, and its collaboration with professional entertainment studios and music labels was a blueprint for games to come. Its physics may have been a bit rough around the edges, but its presentation, speed, and challenge helped cement it and the PlayStation launch lineup as one of the all-time greats. In fact, I would argue the launch lineup not only gave Sony the momentum to dominate the 5th generation console wars, but carried it through the PlayStation 2s and to this day. That's a legacy that is anything but a wipeout. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you, and if you'd like to help a small channel grow, would you be my next subscriber? Make sure to take care of yourself and always remember to keep going, even when things get tough, because you are worth it.